Thabo Mokwena's mansion was one of the most impressive in all of Johannesburg. The house was big and beautiful, with a mix of modern style and African tradition. Tonight, the mansion was full of guests who came to celebrate with Thabo, a man known for his wealth, power, and most of all, his many wives. Thabo was a tall man with a strong presence. As he moved through the crowd, he smiled confidently, holding a glass of wine. He loved showing off his success. He had 5 wives, each one special in her own way, and they made people talk. But Thabo didn't care about the gossip. He believed that having everything was his right. Yet, not everything was as perfect as it seemed. Thabo noticed tension between his wives. They smiled politely, but he could see the looks they gave each other, looks filled with jealousy and frustration. Each wife played an important role in his life, but none of them seemed happy. Nomvula, his first wife, was a woman of great strength and intelligence. She had been with Thabo from the beginning and managed his social and business life with skill. But Thabo could see that the years had worn her down. She was tired, and it showed in her eyes. Lerato, his second wife, was full of passion. She used to bring excitement into Thabo's life, but now that passion often turned into anger. Their arguments were becoming more frequent, and Thabo was getting tired of the constant fights. Dineo, the third wife, was a quiet one. She was very smart and loved to read and study African history. Thabo admired her mind, but she had become distant, spending more time with her books than with him. Her silence worried Thabo because he never knew what she was really thinking. Naledi, the fourth wife, was a former beauty queen. Thabo had been drawn to her looks, but now he found her obsession with staying young and beautiful exhausting. She was always seeking attention, and it was starting to annoy him. Finally, there was Zinhle, the youngest and newest wife. Zinhle was full of energy and life, which Thabo found refreshing at first. But her youth and inexperience were beginning to cause problems. The older wives didn't trust her, and Thabo was starting to see that his decision to marry her might not been as wise as he thought. As Thabo continued to greet his guests, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing control. He had been the master of his world, but now it seemed like everything was starting to fall apart. Still, Thabo was not one to give up easily. He believed he could overcome any challenge as long as he kept pushing forward. A few weeks after the party, Thabo attended a high-profile business event in Sandton, the wealthy business district of Johannesburg. It was at this event that he saw her. Her name was Amahle, a woman unlike anyone Thabo had ever met. Amahle was striking, not just because of her beauty, but because of her calm and confident demeanor. She didn't seem impressed by the wealth and power around her. Instead, she carried herself with a quiet strength that intrigued Thabo immediately. During that event, Thabo found himself drawn to her. He watched as she spoke with other guests, noticing how they were captivated by her every word. There was something mysterious about Amahle, something that made Thabo want to know more. Despite his troubles at home, Thabo couldn't resist introducing himself. When they finally spoke, Amahle was polite but distant. She didn't flirt or try to impress him, which only made Thabo more curious. She mentioned that she was an independent businesswoman involved in several ventures across Africa. Amahle was clearly successful in her own right, and she made it clear that she didn't need anything from Thabo. This only fueled Thabo's interest. Here was a woman who didn't need him, who wasn't interested in his money or his power. She was a challenge, something Thabo hadn't encountered in a long time. He decided that he had to know more about her, convinced that Amahle could be the solution to his growing unease. But as Thabo pursued Amahle, he didn't realize that she was not like the others. Amahle had her own plans, and getting close to Thabo was just the first step. Amahle quickly became a fixture in Thabo's life, her influence growing with each passing day. She was careful, though, to keep their interactions on her terms. Over a series of strategic meetings, she suggested subtle changes to Thabo's business strategies, each move inching him closer to the edge of financial ruin. Thabo, blindsided by his need to reclaim control, followed her advice without question. At home, Thabo's obsession with Amahle did not go unnoticed. His wife sensed that something was changing. Thabo was more distracted than ever, often absent from family dinners and distant even when he was home. The tension between the wives grew, with each one trying to figure out what was happening and how to protect their own position. Nomvula, Thabo's first wife, was the first to confront him. Late one night, after another silent dinner, Nomvula cornered Thabo in his study. "Thabo, we need to talk," she said, her voice steady but firm. Thabo barely looked up from his papers. "Not now, Nomvula, I'm busy." "Busy with what?" she pressed, stepping closer. "You've been distant for weeks. The children barely see you, and I barely know what's going on in your life anymore. Is there someone else?" Thabo sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's just work, Nomvula. You wouldn't understand." "Don't patronize me," she snapped, her calm demeanor cracking. "I've been by your side through everything. If there's a problem, I deserve to know." Thabo dismissed her concerns, telling her that he was just busy with work, but Nomvula knew him too well. She pressed further, but Thabo shut her down, insisting that everything was under control. Lerato, the second wife, was not as patient. She demanded to know why Thabo was spending so much time away from home and why he seemed so uninterested in their lives. Their argument quickly turned heated, with Lerato accusing Thabo of neglecting his family. Thabo, already stressed from the pressure of his business, lashed out, telling Lerato that she was being unreasonable and that she didn't understand the demands on him. Dineo, the third wife, observed all of this quietly. She didn't confront Thabo directly, but she began to investigate on her own. Thabo had always been the most observant, and it wasn't long before she discovered that Thabo had been spending a lot of time with Amahle. She didn't know much about this new woman, but she could tell that Thabo was infatuated. Zinhle, the young and inexperienced, was simply confused. She didn't understand why Thabo was acting differently and felt increasingly isolated from the rest of the household. The older wives saw her as a threat, and she was too naive to navigate the complex dynamics at play. The household, once held together by Thabo's strong personality, was now on the verge of breaking apart. The wives, sensing that they could no longer rely on Thabo to maintain the balance, began to form alliances and plan their next moves. The atmosphere in the mansion grew colder, with each wife trying to protect her own interests. Meanwhile, Amahle continued to play her role perfectly. She allowed Thabo to think that he was winning over her, and all the while planting seeds of doubt and confusion. She hinted at opportunities that required Thabo to invest heavily, draining his resources and stretching his empire thin. Amahle also started to subtly isolate Thabo from his trusted advisors. She suggested that some of them were not as loyal as they seemed, leading Thabo to make rash decisions and dismiss people who had been with him for years. As Thabo's circle grew smaller, his dependence on Amahle increased. What Thabo didn't know was that Amahle had her own plans. She wasn't interested in Thabo's wealth or power for their own sake. She was driven by something deeper, something personal. Perhaps Thabo had wronged someone close to her in the past, or maybe she was simply out to prove that she could bring down a man who thought he was untouchable. Whatever her reasons, Amahle was determined to see Thabo fall. As Thabo's businesses began to falter and his personal life descended into chaos, Amahle remained calm and collected. She was always there with a soothing word or a piece of advice, keeping Thabo focused on her and away from the growing storm around him. As the pressure mounted, Thabo's control over his life continued to slip. His businesses were struggling, his finances were in disarray, and the conflicts at home were becoming unbearable. He turned more and more to Amahle, convinced that she was the only one who could help him. But just as Thabo thought he was starting to get back on track, everything fell apart. It began with a major business deal that Amahle had encouraged him to pursue. The deal collapsed, leaving Thabo on the brink of financial ruin. His rivals, who had been waiting for the right moment, swooped in, taking over key parts of his empire. Thabo stared at Amahle, the realization of her betrayal sinking in. But rather than crumbling, he straightened up, a flicker of his old confidence returning. "You think you've won, Amahle?" he said, his voice steady. "But I still have connections, people who owe me favors. I can rebuild what you've torn down. It's not over yet." Amahle's expression didn't change. She stepped closer, her voice low but clear. "You are a fool, Thabo. Do you think I wouldn't anticipate your every move? While you were busy trying to salvage your empire, I was sealing the final deal. Your last remaining assets are gone. You have nothing, not even the power to fight back." Thabo's heart sank as she handed him a document, a legal transfer of his remaining properties, all signed over to Amahle. His signature, once a mark of his power, now symbolized his complete defeat. The room spun, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. Amahle had outmaneuvered him at every turn, and now she was walking away, leaving him with nothing but the ashes of his once great empire. Initially, Thabo refused to accept his fate. He reached out to old contacts, trying to broker secret deals to regain his wealth, but each effort only deepened his debts and tarnished his already fragile reputation. His final attempt, a desperate bid to manipulate one of his former wives into helping him, backfired, leaving him publicly humiliated. Only then, stripped of all pretense, did Thabo truly hit rock bottom. It was from this place of utter defeat that he began to see the futility of his old ways, and the first real steps toward redemption began, not out of choice, but out of necessity. As Thabo sat down in his now empty office, the realization of his downfall began to consume him. He had spent years building this empire, piece by piece, convinced that it would make him untouchable. But now, as he looked around at the bare walls, he felt the weight of his arrogance pressing down on him. How had it come to this? He had been so sure of himself, so certain that he could control everyone and everything around him. But in his quest for more, he had lost sight of what truly mattered. The faces of his wife flashed before him. Nomvula's stern gaze, Lerato's fiery eyes, Dinewo's quiet disappointment. They had all seen what he refused to see, that his insatiable hunger for power would be his undoing. And Amahle, he had thought she was different, someone who could help him regain control. But she had played him from the start, and he walked right into her trap. The thought twisted in his mind, turning his stomach. For the first time, he truly understood the depth of his failure, not just as a businessman, but as a man. The realization left him hollow. A man who had once had everything, but now had nothing to show for it. The fire in the heath was dying down, much like the fire within him. He didn't even have the strength to rekindle it. In the weeks that followed, Thabo began his journey of redemption. He started with small, humble steps, visiting the communities he had once ignored, reconnecting with old friends he had long abandoned, and finding ways to contribute to society in meaningful ways. Though his wealth was gone, Thabo discovered that he still had something to offer: his time, his experience, and his willingness to listen. He became involved in local charity work, using his business acumen to help small, entrepreneurs who were just starting out. He offered advice, shared his story as a cautionary tale, and slowly began to rebuild his reputation, not as a powerful businessman, but as a man who had learned from his mistakes. The process was slow and often painful. Thabo had to confront the reality of his past actions, the people he had hurt, and the opportunities he had squandered. But with each step, he felt a little lighter, as if the burden of his past was slowly being lifted. Some of his former wives, like Dineo, noticed a change in him. Though they were still cautious, they saw that Thabo was genuinely trying to make amends. He wasn't the same man they had once known. He was quieter, more reflective, and more aware of the consequences of his actions. Nomvula, who had been the most hurt by Thabo's betrayal, remained distant. She had moved on with her life, building a new future for herself and her children, but even she couldn't deny that Thabo had changed. While she didn't offer him forgiveness, she acknowledged his efforts, telling him that she hoped he could find peace in his new path. Thabo's greatest challenge was learning to live with less. He moved into a modest home, far from the luxurious mansion he once owned. He found solace in simplicity, appreciating the small things in life that he had once overlooked. The wealth and power that had defined him were gone, but in their place, he discovered a new sense of purpose. As time passed, Thabo became a respected figure in the community, not for his past glories, but for the man he had become. He was no longer the powerful mogul, but a mentor, a guide, and a friend to those who needed one. He found that in helping others, he was healing himself. One day, as Thabo walked through the bustling market, he realized something profound. For the first time in years, he felt content. The insatiable hunger for more that had once driven him was gone, replaced by a sense of peace. He had lost everything he thought mattered, only to find something far more valuable, a life with meaning, connection, and humility. Thabo knew he could never fully atone for his past, but he had found a way to live with it, to learn from it, and to use it to build a better future. As he watched the sun set over the horizon, he smiled, a small, genuine smile. He was finally at peace with himself and his place in the world. The man who had once believed he could never say no had learned that sometimes the greatest strength lies in letting go. As Thabo embarked on his journey of redemption, the lives of his wives also took new directions. Each of them, having been a part of Thabo's world, had to navigate their own paths forward, independent of the man who had once controlled their lives. Nomvula continued to focus on her children, determined to provide them with a stable future. She had always been a strong and capable woman, and after leaving Thabo, she channeled her energy into starting her own business. Nomvula became a respected entrepreneur in her own right, using the skills she had honed while managing Thabo's affairs. Though she chose to keep her distance from Thabo, she found peace in knowing that she had made the right decision for herself and her family. Her life became one of quiet strength, surrounded by the love of her children and the satisfaction of building something on her own terms. Lerato, the fiery second wife, took a different path. After her tumultuous marriage to Thabo, she decided to pursue her passion for the arts, which she had put on hold during her years with him. Lerato moved to Cape Town, where she immersed herself in the vibrant arts community, eventually becoming a well-known performance artist. Her work, which often explored themes of power, betrayal, and resilience, earned her critical acclaim. Through her art, Lerato found a way to express her pain and transform it into something beautiful, reclaiming her sense of self and purpose. Dineo, the intellectual third wife, returned to academia. She accepted a prestigious teaching position at a university, where she became a respected scholar of African history and culture. Dineo found solace in her work, where she could lose herself in research and writing. However, she also took on a more active role in mentoring young women, using her own experiences to help others navigate the complexities of life and relationships. Dineo's quiet wisdom and strength made her a beloved figure among her students, and she found fulfillment in shaping the minds of the next generation. Naledi, the former beauty queen, struggled the most after leaving Thabo. Her life had revolved around her looks, and as she aged, she found it difficult to adapt to a world that seemed to value her less. However, with the help of friends and a new support network, Naledi began to redefine herself beyond her physical appearance. She started a wellness and beauty business focused on helping women embrace aging gracefully, combining her knowledge of beauty with a new emphasis on inner well-being. Through this journey, Naledi discovered that true beauty comes from confidence and self-acceptance, and she became an advocate for women facing similar challenges. Zinhle, the youngest wife and the one who betrayed Thabo, chose to move far away, seeking a fresh start. The guilt of what she had done weighed heavily on her, and she struggled with the consequences of her actions. In an attempt to make amends, Zinhle used the wealth she had acquired to establish a foundation supporting young women's education in rural areas, but even this didn't bring her the peace she sought. Every time she signed a check or visited a project site, she was reminded of the price she had paid for her newfound power. One day, as she was reviewing the foundation's progress, a young girl approached her. "Thank you, Miss Zinhle," the girl said, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Because of you, I can go to school now." Zinhle smiled, but the girl's words cut deep. This was what she had wanted, to do something good, to make a difference, but the guilt remained, a constant reminder of the past she could not escape. It wasn't until she visited one of the schools her foundation had funded that she began to see a way forward. Watching the girls, their faces full of hope and determination, Zinhle realized that her redemption wouldn't come from wealth or power. It would come from helping others avoid the same mistakes she had made. Slowly, she began to forgive herself, understanding that while she couldn't change the past, she could shape a better future. The wives, each in their own way, found new paths after Thabo. Their experiences with him shaped their futures, but none of them allowed the past to define them completely. They each grew stronger, more independent, and more fulfilled in their own right, proving that life after Thabo could be richer and more meaningful than what they had known before. Their stories are a testament to resilience and the power of self-determination. Though they had once been part of Thabo's world, they each forged their own identities, separate from his influence. In the end, they all found a sense of peace and purpose that had eluded them during their years with him.